how we write our goals or objectives has a fundamental effect on how easy they will be to measure, how meaningful the measures will be, and ultimately how likely the goal will be achieved. If you don't have meaningful measures, then you probably need to revisit how you've written your goals, and this recipe will help you. What we're exploring here is how measurable a goal is and not what the measure of the goal is. There is a difference. If a goal is not measurable, it means we won't be able to find a meaningful measure for it, or perhaps no measure at all. And if a goal is measurable, we still need to take care in how we design the measure for it. If a goal or objective is measurable, it means that we're able to easily find a way to measure it. We're able to measure a goal when, number one, we understand what subject the goal is about. Number two, we can visualize or imagine what will be and hopefully stay different when the goal is reached. And number three, we can agree on what exactly we'd see more of or less of when the goal is reached. There are a few tests of the measurability of any goal, and these tests help us find out which goals need to be rewritten to be able to measure them meaningfully. 3 of these tests of measurability are whether, number 1, the goal is written as a result, not an action. The goal is written with clear and specific language, not weasel words, and the goal is focused on one thing and not multi-focused. Unlike the approach that too many people take, which is rushing straight to the measures, the best way to find good measures or KPIs is to first start with goals that are measurable. A measure is evidence of something, and to be sure the evidence is useful, that something needs to be clearly articulated first. There are some traditional ways that we learn to write goals. We learn to be action-oriented, or we learn to use sophisticated business language, or we learn to include as much as we can so nothing important is left out, but in as few goals as possible. Now, these traditional goal writing approaches create problems for goal measurability, like the ones I just mentioned. For example, we end up with goals written in a way that people just don't understand or don't share the same understanding of them. Weasel words are usually the culprit here. Or we end up with goals that aren't focused on making a difference, but instead focused on just doing stuff. They're simply actions or milestones. Or we end up with goals that are not written specifically enough, and weasel words are at fault here too, but so are the goals that are really several goals smushed together into a single sentence. Now, you might already be agreeing, and you might even be thinking, that the solution is to make our goals SMART. But the solution is not to use a framework like SMART. SMART means specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. SMART is easy to remember, but it's not particularly practical. It names the attributes of goals and includes 2 that greatly influence measurability, but it doesn't help us with how to create goals with those attributes. For example, how exactly do you write a goal that is specific? How exactly do you write a goal that is measurable? A more practical solution, I think, is to understand the grammar and language of measurable goals. And that's because the way a goal is written is essentially about using grammar and language or words to express a desired state that we want to achieve for some specific performance attribute. Writing a measurable goal requires that we meet 5 grammatical checkpoints. And these grammatical checkpoints are not too difficult to understand, but it really does require that we slow down a little bit and be deliberate in how we articulate each of our goals. So these checkpoints are: grammar checkpoint number 1 is the noun is the subject that the goal is about. It will likely be a part of the organization, one of the stakeholders, for example, or any of the routine outputs produced by the organization. For example, the delivery process or customers or policy documents. Grammar checkpoint number 2 is the adjective that is the difference the goal is to make. It's an observable or detectable quality about the subject, that noun, that you want more or less of. For example, accuracy, loyalty, or understandability. Grammar checkpoint number 3 is verbs and adverbs, often but not always suggesting that we have an action, not a goal. So check if you've actually written a milestone or a project rather than a result-oriented goal. For example, complete or put in place or set up or implement or build or establish. Grammar checkpoint number 4 is that if you have commas and conjunctions, it suggests that you have more than one goal. Each goal should be about just one thing. For example, increase speed, accuracy, and productivity. Grammar checkpoint number 5 is the recipe for a measurable goal, which is a noun plus a linking verb plus an adjective phrase or adverb phrase without weasel words. So consider how these examples follow this recipe for writing a measurable goal. The delivery process is more accurate. Customers are more loyal. Policy documents are easier to understand. Revenue is less volatile. Problems are resolved more quickly. Employees feel more engaged. Recruitment becomes less expensive. Work hours are not wasted. Now, of course, goals can be a bit more complex than these, but I really don't think they have to be, not in all cases for sure. Particularly if your goals are not measurable, it is going to help you immensely to go back to those basics first, simply written goals. But it does beg the question, why do we have the immeasurable goal problem in the first place? Well, I think it's endemic, the incidence of goals that are just not measurable. I'm flabbergasted by the overwhelming proportion of organisations that have immeasurable goals and consequently very poor measures. And I hope the irony hasn't escaped you either, that if a goal isn't measurable, then it's not specific and clear, and so we can't ever objectively and convincingly know if it's being achieved or not. Why set a goal we can't know we've achieved? Now, the main reasons for our struggle to set measurable goals that I see most often are these. Firstly, leaders aren't doing enough deep strategic thinking about what goals really matter, what changes are really needed. They're merely jumping through a series of strategic planning hoops. Secondly, organisations have forgotten that an ounce of planning is worth a pound of rework. Everyone rushes through the goal-setting process because, oh my God, we're so busy. We need slower thinking if we're going to avoid trivial goals that waste everyone's time and energy. And thirdly, transparency and accountability can be frightening. Society still is fairly judgment obsessed, and leaders are fearful of the judgment that will come down on them if they are specific and honest about improvement goals. Many of us therefore have to do the rework on our poorly articulated goals. We need to rewrite them, we need to make them clear and specific and measurable. How else can they be achieved? So, try out the formula for a measurable goal. A noun plus a linking verb plus an adjective phrase or adverb phrase. What kind of grammar do you notice in your organisation's goals? And which ones do you now see are measurable and which ones are still immeasurable? As always, if you have any stories or examples to share or you want to ask a question, I would love to hear from you in the comments.